Welcome back to ADHD Realities. I'm your host, Dr. Leann Borneman, and this is the podcast where we talk all things ADHD and sexuality in a way that even research is still lacking. And today I had the absolute honor to sit down with the amazing Dr. Laurie Mintz, the author of Becoming Cliterate and A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex. And we talk all things orgasms, desire, vibrators, and why so many women and vulva owners feel like something is just off, but you may not quite understand what it is. And here's a spoiler alert. You're not broken. You've probably just been following a script that was never written with your pleasure in mind. We talk about the orgasm gap, the myth of foreplay, how ADHD and sensory issues mess with desire, and how to stop treating sex like a performance and start treating it like an experience you actually want to have. Whether you're tired, touched out, overwhelmed, or just wondering why sex doesn't feel like it should, this conversation will validate the hell out of you, teach you a thing or two, high vibration receptors, and even maybe make you laugh, hopefully. So let's throw out the pressure, get curious, and finally have a conversation about pleasure that makes sense for our brains. Let's get into it. Welcome back to ADHD Realities. Today I am joined with the amazing Dr. Laurie Mintz, and I'm very excited about this conversation. It is going to be all orgasms. But before we get into all the awesome information, can you introduce yourself to our listeners today?
I would be delighted to. So my name is Laurie Mintz, and I am a licensed psychologist, a certified sex therapist. I'm an emeritus professor at the University of Florida, where I teach psychology of human sexuality to hundreds of students a year. And I'm also the author of two books which published studies show work. Women who read them enhance their sexual functioning, desire, orgasm, arousal. One is called A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex, and the other, which is what I think we're going to talk about today mostly, is called Becoming Cliterate, Why Orgasm Equality Matters and How to Get It. And I'm just so thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. I love holding space to have more of these conversations. I know a lot of my clients that I work with, the idea of pleasure for a lot of women and vulva owners is very disconnected. And it's a popular and unfortunate navigation. And so one of the things that I learned from you reading
Mm.
the book, but also being grateful to take a course of yours, was this concept of an orgasm gap. And I think it's a great place to start because I think it speaks volume to the discrepancies in pleasure. So, are you able to kind of give us more of an insight on what is it when we say orgasm gap?
Yeah, so the orgasm gap is the consistent finding in the research literature. In fact, over 30 years of research that when cisgender women get it on with cisgender men, the women are having way, way fewer orgasms than the men. And I'll just say a little bit that a lot of people say, oh, women's orgasms are difficult or elusive, but two other gaps tell us no, it's culture, it's not biology. Because when women are alone, 95% orgasm easily and within minutes. And when women get it on with women, they have way more orgasms. Same woman, same body, right? But when they're with women, more orgasms than when they're with men.
That's very interesting. So, my mind goes to what's going on there, right? What are the
Right.
reasons for this then?
Yes, yes. So the reasons for this is there's so many reasons, but the number one reason is in all instances where women have more orgasms alone with other women, there's more clitoral stimulation and less of a focus on penetration. And that makes sense, right? Because 96% of women need some kind of external stimulation to orgasm, and only 4% say their most reliable route to orgasm is penetration alone.
Yeah. And, I think to myself when I work with a lot of clients on this topic, and this is why I'm loving to have this conversation with you, is that I feel like in some ways there's shame or guilt or uncertainty when we talk about these things in real time, feeling almost like you're supposed to be able to achieve an orgasm that way versus what's right for your body. And it's almost as if a lot of women and females and vulva owners haven't really given the support to know what is a way to gain their own pleasure. And, one of the things I like to always say is that I don't necessarily also think it is the man's chosen desire to not give the type of dynamic, if you will, that will provide the pleasure. Would you say that a lot of this is just the learned when you talk about social, like cultural? Would you say a lot of this is where we're learning our sexual education, where we're learning how heterosexual sex even looks like?
Absolutely. I mean, we have terrible sex ed in our culture. So, where do young people get ideas of what sex should look like? The media.
Yeah.
And you don't have to look far to see that in mainstream movies and porn, mostly women are having fast and fabulous orgasms from penetration alone.
Yeah.
And that is not realistic. And so, so many women that I talk to, like they don't even know. They just think they're broken because they don't orgasm the way
Yeah.
that people do in the movies.
Yeah. And that's like the other thing too. And I don't know if I'm jumping here because now my mind's going, I think also this other area of idea that you're supposed to also be able to orgasm together at the same time. You know, what would you say to that? Is that a real thing? Is that a misconception? Are we trying to add pressure in an area that maybe we should
We should
put in the
absolutely, well,
corner?
first of all, first of all, when that's talked about, it's always during penetration, right? So let's take a step back for a minute. First of all, most women don't orgasm from penetration, making that unrealistic already. And also, you need to be mindful to orgasm, like in your own body. The great irony of partner sex is there's a moment in time where each person is so self-absorbed, as they should be, in their own mind, their own body, their own pleasure. And you can't be mindful and orgasm at the same time, like trying three, two, one.
Yeah.
And also, people miss out by that. It is so lovely to experience your partner having pleasure. So if you're having pleasure at the same time, you're missing out on something. So, all that's to say is sure, maybe it happens once in a blue moon, if you will, but mostly it doesn't happen. It's unrealistic and it's definitely not a goal to strive for.
And I really like how you just said there's something really awesome about being able to share that moment when your partner is reaching that moment of pleasure. And, something I always like to say to myself also is that, it's great to be an active participant in your partner's reach and how they're getting their pleasure. But at the end of the day, we are also accountable for our own pleasure. And I think that in itself takes me to the next question I'd love to hear more of is how, if indeed we're seeing a discrepancy in orgasms for women, and there's this orgasm gap, what are the ways that we should be possibly approaching our pleasure that can change this? Are there any techniques? Are there tools that we could be using and doing that can give us this space?
Absolutely. And and it's not just ideas. There are scientific techniques that help women orgasm, things that are supported by research. And, um, all of these are in my book. I didn't make this stuff up in my book. My book is half analysis. Why do we have the gap? And half self-help to close the gap based on science. So let me just kind of summarize the steps that maybe a woman can go through. First, let's look at what's between your ears, right? Our most important sex orgasm, our most important sex organ,
Mm-hmm.
right? is, are you thinking like my pleasure is less important than his pleasure? In fact, we know that the attitude of orgasm centrality is related to more orgasms, and women who have sex with women have more of those. Am I up in my head during sex? Am I doing it right? What does he think? So it's thinking sex positive thoughts and entitlement to pleasure outside of the bedroom and turning on one's busy brain in the bedroom. Then
Mm,
we have to get to know our own genital anatomy. Like, take a mirror, look at yourself, learn your parts, learn where the clitoris is and other erotic parts. Then the most scientifically supported technique is self-pleasure. Bring yourself to an orgasm via masturbation, often with vibrators and lube, which is a whole nother topic, right? But that's not enough. We know women who've never orgasmed often orgasm during self-pleasure, but then you have to transition that to partner pleasure. How? With communication and by changing the way you do sex. No more, fooling around just to get her ready, intercourse, hoping she orgasms that way,
mhm.
sex over. Like taking turns, maybe oral sex where she orgasms, intercourse where he orgasms, etc. So that's a very boiled down the sense of the strategies. But those are all the strategies, and they work.
Yeah, and I think one of the things also that first and foremost, I love that you're bringing the science here because I think we live in a world now where a lot of opinions get thrown out, advice gets thrown out, and we're not necessarily speaking from an objective side. And so this is where I really appreciate this type of interaction and conversation because we're showing that there are approaches that are supportive here. And one of the things I think I heard you say is that it can be very helpful if you don't try to go about it in this start to finish mentality where there is this almost like transactional approach, would you say?
Yeah. Or I'm not even sure if it's transactional, but maybe it is. Maybe I have to understand more what you mean, but more like it's this, what scientists call the script, right?
Okay.
Like foreplay, which is a word I hate, which I'd like to say why. And intercourse, which also is, we use that word with sex simultaneously. I'd love to say why I hate that. So foreplay just to get her ready, intercourse, male orgasm, female idealized orgasm, and action over. And like what we go into it, many people go into
Mhm.
it imitating that. And that's where the orgasm gap really rears its head.
Yeah. And I think you were actually the person that said this. I'm don't if you didn't, I apologize, but I think I remember when I took your class, were you the one that talked about how like this concept of foreplay is technically the appetizer, if you will, when we're looking at like how people feel typically you're supposed to be having sex versus then the penetration is that main course. But in reality, when we're looking at female anatomy, that beginning stage is like the main course. Was that you that said that?
Yes, that
Okay.
like we talk about foreplay as just a warm up to the main event.
Yeah.
And the foreplay is the activities where women are more likely to orgasm. But at foreplay, you're giving me a chance to say why I hate these words so much too. So thank you. It means sort of before the act.
Yeah.
Fore is before play, before the main event. And then when we say that, it diminishes what we do, which is clitoral stimulation often. And then when we use the word sex and intercourse as if they're one and the same, it's like penetration is what counts, whereas we're men orgasm and not women. And so I think what I also said in your class, and I'm really fond of at challenging people to think about, is if we overvalued the way that um, women orgasm, the way we overvalue the way men orgasm, we would call foreplay sex and intercourse postplay.
Yeah. And you're speaking very true. And I'm going to get personal here because I'm all about self disclosure in certain spaces. I've had my own journey of finding myself sexually. When I met my husband, I didn't know a lot about any of this. I was that person that sex for me as a heterosexual woman looked like the quote foreplay and then penetration. And how did you know sex was over? The man ejaculated, and there really wasn't much else. And my husband, who was my partner at the time, he was very caring. It wasn't like he was purposely doing it. And I got to this point when I started educating myself. I turned to him and I was like, I'm done faking my orgasms. I can't do this anymore. And for my husband, he also had a moment of pause because it was challenging his way of looking at how we were interacting too. Like the whole script that we were taught kind of went out the window, and we had to redefine it, re-explore it. And it has been hard, and I'm bringing in my ADHD lens perspective here. And while I know you're not an ADHD expert and I'm not putting you on the spot here at all, I also deal with a lot of sensory issues. So while I know clitoral stimulation is definitely helpful, especially for me and many other women who have ADHD, I also know that there's this other side that it can become overstimulating. And so when we talk about tools and ways, do you have ways to navigate for people just in general who have different preferences in terms of their climax, their touches, and how they're navigating that type of play when we're talking about clitoral stimulation?
Yeah, and I think that I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I think for a lot of women with and without ADHD, too much clitoral stimulation is too much, right? And it can even be painful. And also and I know might tell me if I'm wrong, especially true for people with ADHD, something that feels good one day might feel bad another day.
100%.
Like
Yes.
it changes. Um, and so the best tool is communication. There is no substitute for that. And for getting to know your own body and what you like, and getting that same stimulation with a partner and communicating it. And clitoral stimulation, instead of saying clitoral stimulation, maybe if we say external stimulation, it would be better, because we know very few women orgasm from penetration. And if there's a woman out there listening who does, I am absolutely not trying to diminish your way of orgasming. It's just that most women don't orgasm that way, yet think they should. So I'm
Hmm.
speaking to the majority. But
Yeah.
anyway, anyone orgasms is fine. Uh, so I think the issue is one of, like, sometimes putting Betty Dotson had some great movies where she would be teaching women to orgasm, and she would like put a cloth, like a very soft washcloth, over the vulva and
Hmm.
stimulate that way, or a nice silky pair of pajamas and stimulate on top of the pajamas, so like getting stimulation that still feels good but it's not too much.
I really like what you're saying because, like, I'm getting all excited here talking about this because you're talking into that novelty piece of exploring, being curious. And it's just such a different way, right? Like, I feel like we focus so much on this idea of performance when we're talking about our pleasure and what our roles are, our scripts are. And we forget the importance of exploring and being curious and finding just those different ways of navigating your pleasure, your partner's pleasure, and that there isn't this one size fits all. And I really like that you also switched the clitoral stimulation to external stimulation, because what I didn't realize I was doing by saying clitoral stimulation is that you're just then focusing on the clitoris. There's so much more to the vulva. There's so much more in terms of sensation that could be explored and discovered when we're talking about pleasure. So I really liked how you switched that, because I think that's a good reminder that the skies are the limits, if you will, here, right?
Exactly, exactly. And I think that that's so important, that to focus on pleasure, to focus on sensation, to focus on what feels good, which is different for everyone and can be different within an individual person, and to, communicate that and explore that by yourself, and then get that stimulation with a partner. The other thing I love to say is, and this involves a hand motion, so I don't know, but if there isn't a video, imagine two fingers together going in a circle, right?
Mhm.
The way women pleasure themselves doesn't resemble intercourse at all. Whereas the way men pleasure themselves, imagine an open hand going up and down, totally resembles intercourse.
Yeah, wow. I've never actually thought of it that way, but you're 100% right. That's like a mind-blowing visual there. And so here's my next question then for you. If obviously penetration may not be the end all and be all for a lot of women, and again, if there is, that's wonderful. When I think of working with my clients, generally one of the best tools that comes up is vibrators, but I feel like there's still a lot of shame and misconception around vibrator use, especially vibrator use with a partner. I know you talk about this in your book, so can you talk a little bit more, provide those insights there for us?
Yeah, I could talk about vibrators for hours. It's one of my favorite topics.
And I love your vibrator earrings, by the way, that I see you occasionally wear. Are you
Oh,
wearing them
yes.
today?
Thank
No?
you. Can't wear those anymore because of Instagram shadow bans. Can't.
There.
They even trained AI, I learned to pick up vibrators. So
Oy
you
vey.
can, yeah, exactly. Oy vey is right. So, but anyway, to the point of vibrators, um, here's something a lot of people don't know. Both penises and vulvas have special receptors on them for vibration.
Wow.
Yeah, like if you take a vibrator and you put it right here, like at the top of your forehead, you're hardly going to feel it.
Hmm.
If you put it on your finger, you'll feel it. If you put it on your vulva, you're really going to feel it because there's these special corpuscles that respond just to vibration, and they're all over the penis and the vulva. So there is a scientific, biological reason why vibrators feel good. And we know that there is so much evidence that for women who have used vibrators, they have easier and more frequent orgasms.
Mm.
That's research by Debbie Herbenek. We also know that women who have male partners who endorse and support their vibrator use are more sexually satisfied. And one of my favorite studies, they took a group of men who'd never used a vibrator before, and they gave them the vibrator and said, use this with your partner, your female partner, twice a week for 3 months. And then they interviewed the men, and the men said they loved it, and here's why. It increased novelty, which we were just
Mhm.
talking about. Their partners were more excited, which was exciting to them. Three, because penises and vulvas both have those same receptors, they picked up the vibration on their penis. They found that exciting. And they said it increased intimacy.
Connection.
Yeah, because they had to talk about it.
Yeah.
So it went against all of the myths about
Yeah.
vibrators. And I have a metaphor I use in my book about the whole myth that vibrators will replace partners. And that myth, that metaphor is if you were on a raft and you were swimming and you then got off the raft and you had just a great day, you wouldn't go home and call your partner and go, oh, me and my raft had the best day, and oh, my boyfriend was there. You wouldn't even mention the raft at all. It's just a tool to enhance the experience.
Oh, I love that. That actually makes total sense. And, as you were talking about this too, I always lean into these types of conversations with my ADHD lens. And when you were talking about the receptors piece, right, that both women, men, female, males, they have different receptors that are specifically in line with vibration. I think of a lot of us ADHDers who struggle with understimulation, right, where certain touches just don't work. And I wonder if indeed, because we also have receptors that are specific to picking up those vibrations, if we're robbing ourselves of the stimulation that might be needed for us in terms of those receptors. Am I making sense here? Like my head's going wild right now with this.
Yeah, like that maybe those receptors would really help people with ADHD go, oh, this is what I need.
Yeah, that is so cool. Wow. And I honestly, I feel like such a bad sex therapist right now because I never knew about the receptors piece specifically associated with the vibration. You learn something new every day.
Well, don't feel like a bad sex therapist. I mean, this is, I learn new things every day, and that's what's so wonderful about this field. New knowledge is
Yeah.
coming out all the time, and there's so much to know. And so I think it's fabulous that you just learned something new that you can share with clients.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so here's now where I shift the focus a little bit because when we're talking about definitely the importance of external stimulation and owning your own pleasure, if you will, feeling comfortable, empowered, communicating it with your partner, exploring, being curious. What about the people that through this repetition of not showing up and interacting in a way that works for you, where we've gotten into this territory of now like avoiding, right? The diminished desire piece, the low sexual desire. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel there is still a lot of misconceptions around this experience for a lot of people. And I know the DSM 5 has its own version of something that doesn't necessarily match diminished desire, if I'm correct.
Yeah. So, the DSM basically has something that is about arousal and desire, that you both don't want sex and it doesn't get you aroused. But that's not what most women experience. The most common complaint that women over 35 bring to sex therapists is I've lost my interest in sex. And what is interest in sex? It's the desire to have sex. But when you ask women what they mean by
Mm-hmm.
that, they're going to say, I don't feel horny anymore, right? That's what they're missing. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. The idea of that spark, that ooh la la kind of like attraction.
Right. But what women don't know, it's just like the same reason they don't know about clitoral stimulation. There's two types of desire. There's responsive desire and there's spontaneous desire. And spontaneous desire is the ooh la la that you just talked about. I'm horny, which is really interesting because being horny is actually not desire. It's the early stages of arousal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wetness,
Uh-huh.
tingling, but what that those early stages of arousal happen without touch. They happen just because you're thinking of it. You see a partner.
Mhm.
But the bottom line is that there is a different type of desire. It's the I'm interested in sex in my head for a variety of reasons. Maybe I'll feel closer with my partner. Maybe I'll sleep better. Whatever it is, right? And we then have a sexual encounter without being horny. But as we touch, we get horny. And a lot of women will say, oh, that was good. We should do that more often. But they call it duty sex. And it's like, no, if it's fun, it's not duty sex.
Yeah.
You are women and if more women knew about responsive desire, less women would be saying, I lost my desire. Because what they lost is the feeling of being horny. And why? It could be because they're stressed, they're tired,
Yeah.
women are balancing a lot. It could be for a lot of reasons. Also, maybe if women had better sex, they would want it more. So that's another topic.
Fair. Yeah.
So I think that that's, my first book was all on desire, diminished desire, and my second book was all on orgasm issues. And it's really, really important that women understand that desire is the beginning stage of, or horny is being aroused, and you can reverse the equation. You can have sex to get horny rather than waiting to be horny to have sex.
Yeah, and I remember telling this to my husband once because I hate roller coasters, by the way. And I always used to try and explain it to him because I definitely have an ongoing relationship with this concept of low desire, diminished desire. And there is definitely a sensory piece because of my ADHD in that. But I used to tell him, like, if I have no desire to go on a roller coaster, I'm not going to get on the line, right? I have to have a desire in some capacity. And maybe then I need to relearn roller coasters, right? Like maybe I need to start small and see if it's safe and if it's fun. If it's not fun, and this is just speaking to that pleasure piece, like, right? If sex isn't really set up for you or your pleasure, you're not having good sex or sex that you want, it's going to be really hard for you to want to show up. And I think also for me, and I give this as an example because I would love you to, run off of it if you want, that I'm still unlearning the script. I'm unlearning that script of how sex should look between me and my husband. And so even though I have amazing communication with my husband, that diminished desire can get me very easily. Like it's a very weighted thing. Like this idea of, okay, how are we interacting today? If I have an orgasm, now I have to give him an orgasm, or now I have to do this. Like those are those things that are constantly going through my head that I'm still trying to unlearn, that I know is 100% involved with why I'm not showing up, because I love my husband. And I know a lot of clients love their partners. They want to be with their partners, but this idea and experience is very weighted. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with it. And I want to ask you a couple more questions if I can to understand
Yeah,
your experience and then
yeah.
comment on. So you're saying you sometimes just feel like I don't even want to get in line. I don't want to ride the roller coaster today.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you think you don't want to get in line, what is it? Is it like it's too much effort, like, or I'm too tired, or it's not going to be fun? Like, what is stopping you?
For me, it's a combination, definitely. It's definitely the exhaustion piece that runs through my head. It's this idea of I'm going to have to do. And then when I use my ADHD lens, there's a lot of us that experience like almost like task paralysis. So I call it almost like sex paralysis, because sex can become like a task. There's like this step by step process, whatever that may look like. It can always look differently, but you know it is a process. And for a lot of us, we're not able to visually see that process. And so it can feel like a messy room. And so for me, I know that there's some level of process, and not actually having a structure of it can also create the exhaustion piece of like, is it even worth it?
It takes too much time, too much.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And let me ask you this, because I think I could give you some suggestions that I think would fit for a lot of women, whether they have
Yeah.
ADHD or not. Is this usually at night?
Oh, 100%. I got 3 kids. We're always trying to find the time at night, right? And I already know that that is probably our biggest barrier, especially for me. But yes,
Because
generally at night.
at night, testosterone is lowest, exhaustion is highest, and all those things make sex drive lowest.
Mm-hmm.
And then all you want to do is sleep. And so, what I often suggest, is there any other time that you would have more bandwidth for sex? Would it be at 5 in the morning while your kids are asleep? Would it be on a Saturday while, if there's grandma or grandpa, they take the kids, or a babysitter? Like, would there be any time that you felt like you could actually have more bandwidth to get in line and wait in line for the roller coaster to come and strap you in and blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, and I like that question because I think what you're forcing me to do in a good way is really start to become mindful of where am I at my best in terms of my energy, my attention, the idea of sex and pleasure and engagement isn't also supposed to be done at certain times. It should be really more in line with what works for you both to show up. And I really liked that you just did that because I'm definitely a morning girl.
Okay. And what time do your kids get up?
Gosh, sometimes 6 a.m., sometimes 7 a.m.,
Okay.
sometimes 7:30.
All right. And how are you after a cup of coffee at 5:30?
Oh gosh. I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. Yeah. Coffee is
Maybe we're
definitely the need.
maybe we're setting the alarm once a week.
And I like that because I think also a lot of people struggle with this idea of doing that. Like it's supposed to be just this natural, don't talk about it, just flow.
Absolutely
And I
not.
feel like that in itself is what really creates so many barriers for us.
Yeah, or a weekend morning.
Yeah.
Do you have anybody to watch your kids on a weekend morning?
I mean, yeah, I guess I could, right? If I made those steps, anything could be possible here.
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of what helps, and maybe this is helpful for ADHD, you tell me, is planning. Is for women with diminished desire, you need to plan. You need to say this day, this time, and then I can save the energy. I can, and I'm a huge fan of planning. In fact, part of why I became a sex therapist, I was already a psychologist. I was working with women with eating disorders. This was
Mm,
like, and then I had two kids and a very stressful job. And all of a sudden, I never felt horny anymore. And I told my doctor this. And she said, well, of course you're not horny. She said, you have to pick your ideal frequency and schedule it. And I was like, it was like light bulbs. Yes, if I know when it's going to happen, if I schedule it, if I save time, like you and I, this is an example. You and I didn't end up on Zoom at the same time spontaneously.
fair.
Like, oh my goodness, I'm on Zoom and so is Leann. No, we planned it. We said it's important enough to both of us that we're going to show up for this. And that's pretty cool. We both said this was important. And I think saying sex is important. So I'll self-disclose now. That was like it maybe in 1996. My
Mhm.
doctor said that. I had two little kids. They're grown now. Okay. They have husbands and families and their own lives. Okay.
Mhm.
I've been planning since then, even as an empty nester, when I could do it whenever I want. When they were little, I used to joke the only reason I sent my kids to Sunday school was for that, you
Fair.
know? And now it's Sunday afternoon around 3 or 4 o'clock. And it's like, I have friends who say, oh, do you want to go to yoga or go for coffee or a walk? I'm like, no, that's my time with my husband.
Mm. That's
You
really
know,
also empowering and connective too. And to answer your question, planning, I think, gets somewhat tricky for a lot of us ADHDers. And I think one of the reasons it becomes tricky because when you gave the example of when something's important, you plan, you schedule, right? This was important to me and I wanted to be here. And I didn't know where it was going to take me though, right? I just knew that it was important. I was here, I was ready. And I think one of the biggest problems for a lot of us ADHDers is if we place too much of an expectation and emphasis on what you should be doing in terms of the goal of showing up, that in itself can cause you still to be disconnected from the idea of planning.
well, I think that could be a strength, to be honest, because,
Really?
yeah, because you're not planning to have intercourse and orgasm, this. Approach it the same way you approach this conversation. I'm going to exchange touch and love and connection with my partner, and I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah, I love that. I really
And
do.
it so instead of maybe saying I'm planning sex, just say I'm planning time to exchange love and connection and sensation with my partner. And won't it be interesting to see where it goes? And in fact, if more people had that attitude, people would have better sex because sex that is goal oriented is less likely to be good anyway.
And I feel like the goal generally is on the orgasm.
Yeah. And
And
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, and I think that is the task paralysis piece for a lot of us ADHDers. It's this idea of the performance, the end goal, and that's just very overwhelming. And yeah, I don't think that that's just an ADHD thing. I think that in itself is a huge stressor for a lot of people that then affects your desire to show up. And it's behind the scenes most of the time. Like you're not actively thinking about it for a lot of the times. And that is a huge barrier, a huge weight.
Absolutely. The goal, and that was a great irony in all my work and in writing my book. My book was about to help women orgasm, but the goal of having an orgasm makes one less likely.
Yeah, that is really a very contradictory thing if you think about it. But, if you can indeed go into just interactions, just more, again, I always love to say explore. be curious, enjoy. It's no different than when you begin to bake or cook or take on a new hobby, if you will. Like you're exploring, you're finding out what works and what doesn't work. It just seems like sex is just this area that we just don't do enough of that with.
Yeah, see how a dash of cinnamon tastes in the recipe. And if it's
Yeah.
not good, then you won't put it in next time.
Fair. Now, can I then? I think this is a great segue to this idea and experience of desire. Do you have any tools, resources, approaches that can indeed be helpful to all individuals when we're talking about this desire piece missing?
Well, I think part of it is it's very similar. First is the mind. What are you thinking about sex? Often women with low desire are thinking it's too much effort.
Mm, mm-hmm.
It takes too long. I'm too tired. And starting to, we know that things you think do have an impact. So really consciously saying things like, sex is for me, sex is fun, remember, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Also, and this piece is probably very relevant for people with ADHD, is to enjoy it while it's happening, to focus where you are on the sensations, which is challenging, I understand. And then also, again, the idea of don't wait to be horny to have sex.
Yeah.
Have sex to get horny. Let reverse the equation. The metaphor here is like a car that you need to scrape the ice off.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a pleasant drive. You don't drive a car
Yeah.
with ice all over it. So, think, let the touch take you there rather than wait to want to be touched.
Mm, I like that. I do. And that all in itself just really takes away that pressure piece.
Yeah, pressure and sex don't mix well.
Yeah, I actually had a couple that I worked with, and I always like to share this. They themselves were very creative in their approach, and I like that with creativity, you can do so many different things to create a space of lack of pressure and create almost like those external cues. And that's something us ADHDers definitely need a lot more. We need the reminders in our environment to make up for the lack of our ability to possibly remember ourselves with the working memory deficits. And they had this like amazing whiteboard in their room, and they always had like different interactions that they would pick, and they would have like partner meetings talking about, okay, what are we going to throw on this board this week, and what are we going to then explore and communicate beforehand, and just have that goal of exploring different touches, different interactions. And 9 times out of 10, a lot of the interactions when people are going into it in that curious space, they do end up getting to whatever that end result is, but you're creating the space of removing the pressure and
Yeah.
also making it fun.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
Now,
Yeah.
really quickly, I know we're running out of time, but I would be very upset with myself if I didn't ask you. And this kind of goes back to the orgasm piece. I've had a lot of clients, and I'm also a professor. I teach human sexuality. So a lot of my students also, this concept of G spot and other ways of orgasming. Now, I know that everyone is different, right? Like we all have different capabilities and ability, whatever. But this idea of G spot, is it really a thing, or is this just more of a experience that could be had, but maybe for some people it isn't, and that's okay?
Yeah. So the G spot isn't actually a spot. The actual scientific name is the clitoral urethral vaginal complex. And it actually has some clitoral pieces in it, some vaginal, some urethra. And without getting into the weeds, here's what we know about it. Some women can find it, some women can't.
Okay.
We all have that area, but for some it's easier to find than others. Among the ones who find it, some find it to be neutral, some find it to be unpleasant to stimulate, and some find it exciting or orgasmic. But so women differ. And what Betty Dotson said is the media hype around the G spot has set women back to
Mm,
a Freudian era where we're all looking for a magical spot in our vagina. So if you can find it and it's fun, use it. And if not, no big deal. It's just another way women differ.
It's the variation, and it's all
Yeah,
about what works and removing the
exactly.
pressure that I'm hearing and exploring your body. And again, giving yourself grace. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, that just means lean into different ways, right?
Exactly. That's a great,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, that was just so great. I so appreciate you being here. Really quickly, can you tell people where to find you if they're looking to maybe get more information on your
Yes,
work,
that
your
would be
books?
you can go to my website, which is www.drlauriemintz, DrLauriemintz. And my books are linked there, but you can buy them on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold. And I am on all different kinds of social media, but the one I really focus on is Instagram. And my handle there is Dr. Laurie Mintz as well. And I'd love for people to follow me.
Yeah, and I'll put all of that information down in the descriptions. And before we end today, I'm putting you on the spot, but if you could leave people with one bit of wisdom, words of, I don't like to say advice, but maybe support, would you have anything to leave us with?
Yeah. Yes, I would. Stop shooting on yourself when it comes to sex. Don't look at the media and think that's how you should be. Figure out what works for you and honor that.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Laurie Mintz, for
You're
being here
welcome.
today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, this was wonderful. And until next time, everyone, be well. All right, my friends, that's a wrap on today's episode. If your brain feels seen, if your body feels a little more understood, or if you just learned something that made you go, wait, what the actual fuck? Why didn't anyone tell me that sooner? Please do me and yourself a huge favor. Follow the show, subscribe, share the absolute shit out of this episode. Text it to your group chat, send it to your partner, blast it in your car while pretending it's a TED Talk you gave. Whatever works. Because the more we talk about this stuff, the real stuff, the less alone we feel and the more empowered we become. You deserve to be validated, you deserve to be informed, and most importantly, you deserve pleasure that makes sense for your brain. As always, it's all about setting yourselves up for success in your environment, your relationship, and your sex. Catch you next time on ADHD Realities.